Right, cadets, Dr. Cook here. This is going to be an introduction about indirect fires. Okay, so first thing we need to understand is that there's a call for fire process in order to get indirect fires. And we start that out with some observer has to call for the indirect fire to come in, and then they can also control adjustments on that fire. Now when they call that in, it gets called into the fire direction center. All right, they're the ones that evaluate it, convert it into firing commands that go to the guns. All right, so the Fire Direction Center then sends the fire mission over to some asset that's going to shoot it, whether that's a mortar or that's a howitzer or something else, a rocket system. The squad is going to get that fire mission. They're going to fire it, and that's going to deliver it onto the target, and that's how you get your effects on target. From that, your observer can adjust fire if they need to and can continue to go through that cycle. All right, so what kind of assets do we have? We have a variety of things, right? So you can see here that we've got 60, 81, and 120 millimeter mortars in our inventory. We also have 105 and 155 millimeter howitzers. And then we also have our rocket systems like the MLRS. All right, now this chart gives you some idea of what kind of ranges they're effective at. All right, so make sure that you don't plan a target for a system that can't hit it. All right, so if we have a target that is 8 kilometers away, we can't use a mortar system to hit it. That is out of their range. Okay, if we're trying to shoot around to something 4 kilometers away, we could hit it with an 81. We can't hit it with a 60 millimeter mortar. All right, so just be aware of these kind of ranges and what kind of systems we have available to plan those targets for. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what these systems are. We can start out with mortar systems. All right, these are things that fire rounds at very high angles. All right, so above 45 degrees up to about 89 degrees. All right, so rounds that go pretty much all the way up and then come back down. All right, they have low muzzle velocities. All right, these rounds are kind of slow. It's a very simple design. It's a tube. You take the mortar bomb, you drop it down the tube. When it hits the bottom of the tube, it then fires off and comes out and goes up. All right, we have some sights to help line them up. Typically a smoothbore kind of weapon, all right, which means these mortars have fins on them to keep them stable. All right, some of the pros, mortars can be really fast response. All right, you can have your mortar team nice and close with you. All right, the fact that it shoots such a high angle means the round is going to land relatively close to where it was fired from. All right, we have a high rate of fire. All right, you drop that round down the tube, it fires out at a muzzle velocity, and you can immediately drop another one in. All right, we don't in our army we don't have fire direction centers working with the mortar teams. All right, so that simplifies the process. It's a very simple system. Mechanically, there's like no moving parts on the mortar tube itself, and the round is just something we drop in there. And they're highly mobile. These are small systems. All right, so the 120 millimeter mortar is the biggest one. You can see a picture of one of the kinds of systems here, but they can easily be mounted on vehicles, on trucks, something that we can roll around. The 81 millimeter mortars, crews can carry them. We can put them into backpacks to the light infantry if we have to. It's easy to throw them into a truck, and we can get into 60 millimeter mortars. You can pick it up and fire them. Just by putting them against the ground or against the tree or something sturdy. Cons are they have limited range, right? These are not long-range artillery assets. All right. We also are limited in how much ammunition we can carry and how we resupply that, because it's generally infantry soldiers having to move things around. All right. And because they're just a small unit asset in the infantry community, we don't have a lot of the support from MET data, so it's basically weather data, right? Now all of that gives us some precision in how we do the calculations for the ballistics, so the mortar teams don't have access to that, so they're making some assumptions about standard kind of weather, and that's what we're dealing with mortars. Now our other assets, we get into the field artillery owned assets, all right, such as our cannons, our howitzers, missile-based systems and rocket-based systems. And just like when we talked about anti-tank shoulder launch things, all right, these kind of things, the rocket is something that is unguided, all right, we point it in the right direction, we launch it, and missiles that have some kind of guidance system, typically GPS on our precision-based systems, but that could be it could be some other kind of warhead on there that gives it a guidance package. Now we have pros and cons also with using our field artillery assets. All right, we can operate in all conditions and weather. All right, they can very rapidly change where they are putting their fires or mass more fires on without having to displace the gun. They cover such a large area, we can just re-aim the gun tube. They give us some depth in combat, all right, because they have such long range. Even though the guns might physically be behind our combat units that are in contact, they can be ranging fires onto the enemy's rear while we have combat operations going on. We have a variety of things we can put into them. It's mobile as the unit that it's with, all right. And we can also use radars to pick up enemy artillery and fire counter battery against their indirect fire assets. Now, some of the cons with the field artillery is self-defense issue, right? They put themselves out there. They have to place their guns down and get their aiming stakes out, which makes them an obvious target for the enemy, both in ground attack and air attack if they don't have something there to protect them. They've got limited abilities against moving targets, especially fast-moving targets. That's a difficult thing for artillery to try and hit. And their timelines on trying to get these fire missions in, we're going through the Fire Direction Center, can be kind of lengthy, especially depending as we go up to different levels of assets. So if you're a platoon leader, you might have to call your company commander, who then has to pass that to a battalion staff fires officer, who's going to call the Fire Direction Center, who has to send that down to a gun battery, which then has to get it to their particular gun. That's a lot of communication that goes on that kind of slows things down, which is why we have planned targets. All right, we can also talk about the capabilities of the types of munitions we can put into these systems. So you have HE, or high explosive rounds. All right, they cause explosions and throw shrapnel around to kill and destroy things. We have smoke rounds, all right, both HC and WP rounds. So these can be used as obscurant on the battlefield to cover our movements for breaches, things like that. Then we have illumination rounds. So if we're out at night, we can request a loom, and that'll come in, and usually they're on parachutes, so they hang in the air for a while and give us some illumination around the area on the ground so we can do our operation. We have both visible and infrared illumination rounds that we can call for. So those are kinds of the basic general categories of types of rounds we can call in. Now within those, there may be a variety of different specific rounds the artillery could use to meet those kinds of missions. Now, along with the different types of munition, the round itself, we also have fuses that have to go on them that control where and when that munition is going to detonate. Part of that where is we can decide that we want a round that explode above the ground, on the ground, or even below the ground, or through something that it went on. That's part of our request that we can put in for the ammunition that we want. So we have a point detonating fuse, or also known as a quick fuse. Basically, when it hits something, it's going to function the high explosive. We also have delay rounds that'll add a delay after it impacts. So once it hits something, it doesn't go off immediately. It has a small delay. That's good for putting it through things, right? When we want to detonate after the first thing we hit. So if it's going to go through a roof and detonate inside of wherever it went, like we want to take out a bunker, for example, below ground. And then we have variable time fuses that really are a way to get things to detonate above the ground at some height and then shred their shrapnel down onto the ground from above. So it's just a way to use the timing to make that happen. And then the last one is electronic fuses or mechanical time fuses. So that's a a way that it measures time from when it was launched. And then we use calculations in math. We know how long it should take to get to the target, so we can also use that as a way to make it detonate exactly when we want, whether that's above the ground at a certain elevation, or if we knew it was going to go through something. That's a little harder to do. All right, now as you're looking at these different kinds of planning and what the requirements are for them, there's a good summary in this table that's here. All right, so I'll share this with you. Now this comes out of our ATP 321.8, Appendix C, Table C1. Just a reference you can use to understand the different systems that are available.
I want to emphasize two things that you're going to get from hire that'll be contained in the order that you receive, all right, from if you're a platoon leader that you receive from your company commander. All right, the first one is priorities of fire, right? That's this table that's shown on this slide. So what this does is go across each phase, all right, and break down during that phase which sub-element has priorities of fire from which weapon systems. All right, so you can see in the table here, if you're first platoon, then during phase 2 you have priority of fire for mortars, and during phase 4 you have priority of fire for the 155 howitzers. So that's a planning tool, and it helps the artillery units or the supporting indirect fire units know who they prioritize, who they give assets to first. All right, now if you don't have priorities of fire, you can still request them. Just realize that someone else is going to have priority over you, and if they want something or they need it, they get it first. All right, and that's just how that's going to work. But that lets the guns be laid in and already kind of organized and oriented a certain direction to support someone. So when you do have priorities of fire, you get them fast. The other side of that, like for example, first platoon in phase 2. All right, 155 howitzers might be great. All right, and maybe you want to request those because that's a bigger gun, but you have priorities of fires on mortars. So if you put in a request for mortars, you're gonna get it. All right, so plan for that. All right, if you put in a request for 155s and you're counting on them, third platoon might want them first and you're not going to get them, or second platoon might request something and the company commander might decide to give it to them. But if you're first platoon, go ahead and use those mortars. But you can still plan targets even when you don't have priorities of fire, and then that helps you also know what's your backup weapon system. So if you're first platoon, your primary is to request mortars. If you can't get the mortars or something happens to them, your secondary is to request the 155s. All right, the other thing that you'll get from the order is these target blocks. All right, that is something that comes in planning guidance. You get given a segment of those. That's how they number things, so that the indirect fire units, you can just call them and say, I want target number Alpha Charlie 3512. That's all you have to tell them on the radio, and they'll know all the information to fire it because you planned ahead and you provided that to them. The way this works, so you don't just get to make up any number. All right, so you get given a block of numbers. So in this case, if you're first platoon, you have to use numbers between 3400 and 3450. All right, but within that, it's up to you. So if you want to say, hey, all of phase 1 will be 01 through 09, and phase 2 will be 10 through 19, and phase, or however you want to organize it, you can do it that way, so you can remember what those numbers are. But you have to stay within the number block you're given, because if you use something outside of that, then you're calling in someone else's artillery and it won't shoot for you. All right, so be looking at your company commander's op order to find out what are the priorities of fire by phase and what are your target block numbers, and make sure you use your numbers.